I have had the weirdest urge to do some live streaming and to be live streaming books for some reason. I don't know why. Um, I read a little bit of the very first novel I ever picked up and read cover to cover on Facebook for my birthday several months ago, and I fully intended to finish doing that someday. And that was The Guardian of Isis, or maybe The Keeper of the Isis Light by a Canadian author, Monica Hughes. It was the beginning of a lifelong fascination with science fiction, and this was probably the next book that I read in its entirety. This is a novel from the Star Trek universe that I picked up, I think, at a book fair in 1983. My brother was not an avid reader, and he definitely, being about a year and a half younger than me, and about 5.5 years old at the time, was not up for reading novels and had other ideas of what to do. But I read through this whole thing, fascinated, I think at least twice. And yes, this is a first edition, 1983. I don't know how many reprints were ever done. Picked up at a Scholastic book fair at my brand new elementary school. It had just been built and I was new there. Wilfred Walker in Regina, Saskatchewan. Anyhow, I very much want to be reading for the world, and I don't know why. This is what I'm going to read. I'll be reading it off of a little screen that's over there. If I twist over this way, it's because I'm having a hard time seeing, but I need to look over here because that is where I can tell what you're looking at. We'll see how this goes. So this is early days of Star Trek coming back. I think between the motion pictures, the first one, and maybe 1982 was that Star Trek 2, and 83. So Star Trek was just starting to really take off from this quirky thing from the 60s into the franchise that it became through the 80s, 90s, and today. The Wounded Sky, a pretty alien scientist, invents the intergalactic inversion drive, an engine system that transcends warp drive, and the Enterprise will be the first to test it. The Klingons attempt to thwart the test, but a greater danger looms when strange symptoms surface among the crew, and time becomes meaningless. Now, Kirk and his friends face their greatest challenge, to repair the fabric of the universe before time is lost forever. Have you read these other Star Trek novels? I love novels from back in the day, right? You're not going to find things on the internet. Nobody's going to advertise books in a targeted way at you. The only way to do that is to put the advertisements in the book. Yeah. Look at this, doing some actual research, right? In support of your science fiction. Love Diane, Duane. This book is for Tom Swale and Duane Poole, stalwart instructors in screenwriting, experts in the care and feeding of other people's characters, and much beloved friends. And for the wonderful Linda Wright, fellow handler of tribbles and other peculiar alien creatures at Starfleet's Northridge Annex. These are the people who assisted me while I was writing this book. By good advice, technical or logistical support, or just reading it and letting me know what worked. Dennis Aarons. Is tailed as what? Anna Brand. What in the world are you talking about? CJ Chera. I should know how to say that. You certainly sound like you're having a good time. Jeff Carver. Gonna write about old Mr. Spock, huh? Chris Claremont. Captain, if you beam down there, it's certain death. It is? Okay, let's go. Arthur Byron Cover. Well, I don't know about you, Diane. Paul Dini. You mean they let you write those? Wilma Fisher. My God, Dee, that's outrageous. The Spring 1981 San Fernando Valley GSLP. You're writing a what? Well, why not? Robbie London. So, what happens? Don Moss. Well, let's see what you've got. Lydia Morano. Smile and silent headshake with optional rolling of eyes. Arthur Nadel. It must be nice to be independently wealthy. Michael Reeves. Lord, now I want to write one of these things. William Rossler. His middle name is Edward. You want a serial number? J. Bryn Stevens. That was really nice. Pam Vincent. You went through a whole box of correcting tape in one day? Ben Yallow. Right. Jane Yolen. Is this contagious? Can I get shots? Mark Scott Zickery. When will it be finished? Very special thanks are due in a few cases. This book could not have been turned in on time without the incredible generosity of Michael Reeves and Bryn Stevens, who lent me their Apple II. This was the 80s. And were heroically patient with me during the book's production. David Gerald, as usual, was calm and matter-of-fact about the good parts of the work in progress, and cutting about the parts that were less than good, a technique I hate, and for which I thank him profoundly. And a very late dinner at Denny's with the incomparable Marty Rich. Wow, this is the wrong night to just do an off-the-cuff live stream of me reading, isn't it? And the incomparable Marty Clark Rich produced a glass spider that jumped into her plate and then stalked away, dragging a Trek novel behind it. You did it to me, Marty. Thanks and love. Two great powers are on our side. The power of love and the power of arithmetic. These two are stronger than anything else in the world. E. Nesbitt, The Island of the 12 Whirlpools. 1. The problem with waiting around in space to see a starship go by is that when a ship is in warp drive, she's hardly there at all. The other space in which the warp field embeds her is just that. Other. A neighboring alternate universe in which natural laws are different and light moves many thousands of times faster than in the universe to which the 683 species of humanity are native. A starship in warp carries a shell of that other space with her, so that within it she moves at many multiples of light speed through the analog universe, without really being in our universe at all, or running up against its intractably low speed of light. Within the ship, of course, sensors are calibrated to edit out the slight strangeness of the other universal starlight that all the humanities find so unsettling. Outside the ship, all there is to be seen of her passing is a tremor of starlight as space itself is shaken, wrinkles, and slowly smooths out again. At the heart of the shimmer, there might be the faintest, palest ghost of light, not even an image, an impression, a hint, maybe an illusion. It is a long time before the many-colored fires that are the stars begin to tremble in one small patch of the endless night. Far out there, behind the tremor, is a wake of light too faint for all but the keenest-eyed species to perceive unaided. Disturbed radicals, fragments of elementary molecules floating free in space, excited to higher energy states and glowing hot. The tremor wrinkling gets closer, covers more area. Drifting lazily in its path is a cold comet far out from its primary, a dirty, dormant snowball. The tremor runs at it, unconcerned. Sensors have confirmed that there's no traffic of any kind for parsecs around, which is as well, considering that a warp field and a physical object can meet and retain their mutual integrity only under carefully managed conditions. Those conditions are not met here. The ship in warp runs, in other space, right through the comet, unharmed, barely noticing. In this universe, however, space writhes and wrenches, its fabric strained. The comet contained in it shatters into a cloud of stone splinters, ice fragments, and twinkling water vapor snow. Yet, after a little while, the troubled space quiets. The ripples flow away, and the remains of the comet, not having been hit by anything in this universe and thus taking no acceleration from the impact, continue on along the same orbit through the long night. 300 and a few years from now, two sentient species formed up for battle will be watching the skies for the comet which has since time immemorial been the god signal to them to begin killing one another. Instead of the comet banner blazing across their sky, however, what they will get is a dazzling rain of stars. Tremendously relieved, they will rejoice. at the long-prayed-for sign of an armistice in heaven, go back to their homes and beat their swords into plowshares. Here and now, an unseen something fleets by so swiftly an observer would probably never perceive her at all. A flicker, a shimmer, a passing thought in the endless silent ruminations of the universe. The USS Enterprise cruises through on patrol. No matter how many times they rebuild this ship, thought James T. Kirk, they'll never put in enough room to pace properly. The Enterprise's captain, multiply decorated for courage in the face of threatening circumstances and commended for calm in the most nerve-frazzling situations, was pacing up and down in his inner office and scowling at everything. The hollows of previous Enterprises on the walls, the small collection of native art of several planets, bright colors and raw, rough shapes in wood and metal, boxed in I should know what that is. That's inertogen. Of course. Boxed in inertogen and veriglass, the impeccably neat shelves and tables, and the immaculate desk, all of them brought scowls. The desk in itself was a particularly bad sign. Jim Kirk never cleared the clutter of cassettes and pads and report chips off his desk unless he was at the end of his commandatorial rope about something. The word was out, of course, all over the ship. Departments that had been letting things slide a little were shuttering hurriedly into optimum shape, and desks in them were not only being cleared off, they were being scrubbed. None of this made Kirk feel any better, though he was pleased that his people respected him enough to handle their departments so that he didn't have to handle them. Right now, he would cheerfully have traded all the holy stoning going on in the down levels for one particular piece of good news. He scowled at the wall screen. Which, with its usual mulishness, was refusing to do what he wanted. Try to get the damn thing to keep quiet, he thought. And it announces Klingon invasions, sector-level disasters, mysterious distress calls. Now look at it, sitting there like so much scrap. His mouth quirked in annoyance, unrepressed for once since his crew couldn't see. The screen stayed predictably silent. Finally, Kirk grimaced at himself and resorted to his old cadet exercise of making it worse. He stood there and considered all the reasons he had to be mad, and concentrated on getting madder and madder. 6 months now, this business of the drive has been going on. Every time they're about to announce who gets it, they postpone the announcement because of the damned political infighting going on over who gets the credit, who gets the publicity plum of having their sector's starship test it. No consideration of ship or crew merit. And that was the part that was very easy to be mad about. For James T. Kirk knew that if merit were being considered, his ship would sail away with the drive. No contest. Months of squabbling over destination of the first test emissions, arguments over petty details, who gets to be on what committee, determining who gets what parts and supply contract, who gets to pick, who gets to do the paperwork. Sorry, what the hell? Who gets to be on what committee, determining who gets what parts and supply contract, who gets to pick who to do the paperwork. Damn. He got mad and madder. He ground his teeth, and, as usual, the mad abruptly vanished, replaced by a sense of the profound silliness of the situation. A seasoned commander, standing here gritting and twitching over what couldn't be hurried, helped or fought. He laughed out loud at himself and went to the wall for a uniform tunic, pulled out a gold-colored one, idly wondering how long this generation of uniforms would last. They said the announcement would be today, he thought with rueful humor. And they've said that 7 times before. Or is it 8? The hell with this. I'm going down to Wreck to look at Lieutenant Tanzer's forest. And the wall screen whistled at him, startling Jim so badly that he spent a fraction of a second crouching toward an attack or defense stance before he realized what the sound was and straightened up again. "Screen on," he said, lowering his hands out of pickup so the white knuckles clenching on the tunic wouldn't show. The screen came on, revealing the communications board and Uhura's beta shift communicator in training, Lieutenant Mahasai. A craggy-featured hominid, gray-skinned and gray-haired and gray-eyed. Even to the whites. "Your pardon for disturbing you, sir," he said in the usual mellow Assyriat drawl. "I have a squirt from Starfleet for you with Maximum's security scramble and captain's seal on it. Shall I transfer it to your terminal?" "No need," Kirk said, and reached over to touch the combination of controls on his desk that would allow the main computer's access to his personal command ciphers. "Implement, and read it." Mahase nodded, putting his transdater in his ear with one hand, touching various controls at his own console with the other. Jim listened to his heart hammering. Finally, non-standard transmission. Code groups 06444, 51852, 30, Mahase said. Kirk exhaled and held the swearing in very tight. For there was the 064 group that was one flag officer to another, code for very bad news. Damn it. Someone else got it. How could that have happened? We were the logical choice, even by their standards. Even Spock said the odds were. Begin message to James T. Kirk, commanding NCC 1701, United Systems Starship Enterprise in Coma B Patrol Corridor, from Halloran, R.S. Vice Admiral, Starfleet Command, Sol 3, Terra. Subject, Tepask Svesk. Subject, Tepask Svek. Elective. Good fucking God, could you have a vowel in there somewhere? Subject to Pask Sevek. It's a good thing I'm not recording this for like serious business here. I'm just enjoying a book. Elective mass inversion apparatus. Body. You are directed to abort present patrol, which will be assumed by USS Henrietta Leavitt. When relieved, you will proceed with all due haste to shipyards at Hamal Alpha, Ariadus 4, Starbase 18, for installation of prototype apparatus and Enterprise, maintaining Class 4 silence while in transit. My God, we got it! Specialty personnel to be involved in mission have been notified. Roster rendezvous at Starbase 18 to be complete by Stardate 9250.00. Kirk let the straightness of his spine loosen up a touch. Roster fellows. And they add it, sir. It's in the computer for you. Mahase paused. There's an addendum after the seal and verification, Captain. Jim nodded at the lieutenant. It says, Jim, for me it was bad news. I wanted it for Raptor. Happy hunting. Happy hunting, you lucky bastard, and give the galaxy next door my best. Regards, Rhonda. Thank you, Lieutenant Mahase, the captain said. Please put the message in the department head's network and flag it on Mr. Spock's and Mr. Scott's terminals. He kept himself looking like the picture of calm, with just a quirk of pleased smile added, as if doubt were entirely foreign to him. And tell the heads we'll be meeting later this afternoon. I want this ship ready to head out of the galaxy in 5 days. Aye, sir, Mahase said, as calmly as if he would be able to manage the whole business himself. Bridge out. Screen off, Kirk said, and waited a long breath or two to make sure the screen was dead. Then he glanced at the door to be sure it was sealed. He took another breath. Yee-haw! On the bridge, Mahase winced and smiled and took the transdater out of his ear. I think he'll be all right now, he said. No one paid him much attention. The bridge people were busy with screaming of their own, pounding of backs and clapping and hugging, and, in a few cases, settling of bets. In the helm, Sulu sat as still as a statue of some bemused old oriental god, saying nothing but wearing a small and delighted smile on his face. Down in engineering, Scotty glanced away from the barely tamed lightning of the matter-antimatter plasma mix cylinder to see his computer link pad flashing at... What a sentence. Okay. Down in engineering, Scotty glanced away from the barely tamed lightning of the matter-antimatter plasma mix cylinder to see his computer link pad flashing at him. He picked it up as gingerly as if it were alive, read it, and then began whooping with delight and ordering his people to dismantle. You know what? It's 2:28 a.m. I shouldn't be reading. He picked it up as gingerly as if it were alive, read it, and then began whooping with delight and ordering his people to dismantle the Hilbert Field Taurus they had just spent 2 weeks assembling. On the observation deck, in meditation under that water-wavery, bizarrely colored starlight that most of the humanities avoided so scrupulously, a still form in Science Department blue sensed mesoelectronic relays shifting states in his pad, and diverted enough attention to read the message that formed on its surface. A half-second later, Spock turned his eyes back up to the unnerving blankness that trembled with its troubled fires above him. He seemed unmoved, but one who knew him well might have noticed that his dark eyes seemed to reflect a bit more than they had, as if the universe had suddenly gotten larger. All over the Enterprise, people of all 92 kinds of humanity represented among her crew You know, you'd think if I'd read this book a couple times, I'd know how to parse out these sentences. All over the Enterprise, people of all the 92 kinds of humanity represented among her crew hollered, cheered, ritually grimaced, bowed to one another, shook hands, applauded, and broke out private stores of food to drink and private stores of food and drink to celebrate with. Even for the Enterprise, a ship almost inured to wonders and terrors, this was an occasion worth celebrating. They had been to the stars. Now, they were headed beyond them. "Coming up on Alpha, Captain," Chekhov said, watching the star's computer. "Coming up on Alpha, Captain," Chekhov said, watching the star's computer-corrected spectrogram shift into the blue on his board. "Status, Uhura?" "Engineering secure." "Crew departments report all secure." "Defense departments, aye." "Ship secure, sir." "Go sublight, Sulu." "Aye, aye." Sulu's hands moved with their usual quick care over the board, double-checking the intrinsic velocity and vector of the Enterprise. Double-checking the intrinsic velocity and vector the Enterprise would be carrying when she dropped out of warp. Even computers developed bugs, after all, and Sulu had no desire to run a starship full tilt into a planet or a sun, at least not while he was piloting it. He checked one last time, was satisfied, and touched the control that struck the warp field. From outside, it seemed as if a great patch of star-pierced sky had gone mad. Stars veered and wobbled in it, changed colors wildly, bloomed and faded like burning flowers, and suddenly whiteness was there, with hard, sharp edges, and the stars went sane again, the ones that could still be seen. Between the stars and the local traffic loomed a great graceful shape, breaking down fast as she skimmed by. Upper primary hull, lower secondary hull cylinder, the two slender nacelles on their outward angled supports rising from the secondary hull. There she went, no ghost anymore, now almost too real to bear, a silvery blaze, blindingly plated with the fiery orange gold light of Alpha Arietis, a Class KO giant star. The only part of the ship that didn't shine was a black charactery on the upper and lower sides of her primary hull. The letters were thick and squared, Terran Roman letters, for she was one of the 22 heavy cruiser starships of Terran Registry, the flagship of the Earth's fleet and the pride of the oxygen breathers in that part of the galaxy. Slowing down, easing her majestic bulk into a long, lazy orbit around Alpha until base orbital control could give her a docking vector. Enterprise made starfall at Hamal Alpha Arietis in a yellow blaze of splendor. And far out beyond any sensor's range, undetected in the cold dark wastes, something stretched and strained intolerably, and slowly began to tear. Time to just sort of double check what's going on in the universe. Well, looks like my stream is still going. There's that at least. Of course, I am my only viewer. Who would join me for a Star Trek novel? Nobody, really. I'm going to keep going. This is fun. Two. Starbase 18, in orbit 200 million kilometers from Hamal, could be seen from a long way off, and the sight was lovely. At distance, what one saw was a golden-tinged oblong, rounded at the ends like a cigar and shimmering delicately as it end-over-ended through space. Closer, though, the size of it became apparent. Other starships, light cruisers and cutters in for repair or scheduled maintenance, were nested among the innumerable spikes and struts and spires of its outer surface. The whole structure glittered in 1,000 shades of blinding gold as Starbase 18 tumbled on around Hamal, ponderous and beautiful, and a bit amusing. "We have our vector, Captain." "Good. Mr. Sulu, take us in." Kirk watched with satisfaction as Sulu's fingers flickered over his board. Thank God, no more mail runs, Jim thought. No more boring Starfleet errands for a while. Something big to stretch my people. To stretch me, he added to himself after a breath. Lately, the feeling had been creeping up on him that the galaxy was getting ordinary, that the commonplace was settling into it. One planet, one new species, one crisis with Romulans was beginning to feel like all the others before it. Do I need a vacation? And where the hell do I go when the fringes of the known universe are getting boring? Well, that's getting handled. The screen changed views, and the flicker brought Kirk's attention back to it. Mr. Sulu had gone over to base sensors and was picking up their image of the Enterprise coming in. Kirk smiled at her, loving the stately lady for the 1,000th time, and then was surprised when she abruptly went mischievous, 1,000 kilometers out from the base. The world stayed right side up, as usual, inside the ship, but the base sensors showed her rolling slowly, luxuriously on her longitudinal axis. One victory roll, then another, while overexcited ions screamed light in her wake. "Belay that, Mr. Sulu," Kirk said, at some pains to sound stern. "This is serious business." "Aye, sir," Sulu said, looking soberly up and suppressing his smile as well. He knew the captain had seen him setting up the maneuver and had said nothing. After all, look what ships were at 18. Some of them prime contenders for the drive. Some of them old friends of the captain's or old friendly rivals. USS Milton Humison, USS Elanwi, USS Challenger, and smaller ships that had worked with Enterprise before or crossed her path. Condor, Indomitable, QE3, Look Far. Sulu touched a control here, one there, and made the ship straighten up and fly right. Kirk let his own smile go no farther than his eyes, and watched their approach, which was so close now that Enterprise was blotting out most of the base sensor's sky. "Back to our visual in a moment, Mr. Sulu," he said. The screen changed again to show one unspiked end of the huge structure irising open for them, revealing a portal that could have swallowed 20 starships side by side. All about the opening door, mirror-polished stanchions and spires glittered fiercely golden and hatched the surface and one another with razor-edged shadows. Kirk winced as base navigations guided him into the heart of the light. "Cut the intensity on that, would you, Uhura?" he said, averting his eyes, then glancing back when the brightness was handled. There was something about the great silver and gilt interior that drew the eye, and at the same time made the watcher nervous. Well, it's the old thing about alien architectures. The place isn't Terran built, if built was even the right word, for the exterior skin of the base was really only a tight, fine mesh woven of what seemed, at this distance, delicate threads of mirror-finished steel, and were actually long single crystal extrusions, each 2 meters thick. From the skin, substructures hung, tethered by cables or jutting out on odd-shaped supports, looking like packages dangling on or stuck on poles. From the skin, substructures hung, tethered by cables or jutting out on odd-shaped structure. One more time. From the skin, substructures hung, tethered by cables or jutting out on odd-shaped supports, looking like packages dangling or stuck on poles. They were offices, service bays, living quarters. All along the interior of the structure, little drones glided along twisting rails or sailed by on chemical propulsion, flashing suddenly if they happened into a sunbeam, piercing the interior through one of many oddly placed apertures. Motion, haste, an impression of life that was quick and glittering and very alien. That was what Kirk got, along with a slight uneasy feeling at being closed in. But what am I thinking of? He chided himself a moment later, considering the folly of trying to understand much about another species just from its artifacts. He recalled the conclusions of Tegmenner. He recalled the conclusions that Tegmenner had come to about Earth humanity from the single chair they'd found, and cautioned himself against judgments. Still, it was hard to believe they were only 75 light-years from Earth. "It's a lovely place they've got here," Scotty said from where he stood beside the helm. On the screen, shadows slid and flickered as Hamal's fierce golden fire shone through, and was occluded by the outer webwork of the starbase. "I'd like to meet the designers." On the other side of the helm, Spock stood straight and still with his hands behind his back, looking unmoved and calm as always. But his eyes were for the screen as much as Scotty's. You may have that chance, Mr. Scott. 2 of the Hamalki members of the base design team are also involved with the development of the inversion drive. "Thanks for telling me, Mr. Spock," Scotty said, looking very pleased and anticipatory. Jim smiled to himself. A brief stint at a desk job with the Federation's Bureau of Planetary Worlds had only served to increase Scotty's absolute worship of excellence in design in everything. Meeting one of the Hamalki designers, famed as among the finest in the known universe, would probably be akin to a religious experience for him. "How are we doing, Mr. Sulu?" Kirk said. "A pilot's coming out for us, sir. ETA to dock is 5 minutes. "Sir," said Uhura from her post, "base operations just called. Commodore Cathasat's respects, and it would like to see you in its office along with the chief engineer and whatever other department heads will be involved with the installation proper." "Fine. Acknowledge and tell it we'll be along immediately, docking." I think there's a word missing there. "And tell it we'll be along immediately, docking is complete. When something." "Here comes the pilot, sir," Sulu said. "They'll be belaying us on tractors." "Uhura, advise all hands." "Done, sir." Sulu touched his controls again, and the view changed once more on the screen as the Enterprise eased to full stop, hanging there at the heart of the immense silvery structure. From off to one side, something small and bright shot out from a crevice. You know, it's a good thing I don't read books for a living. From off to one side, something small and bright shot out of a crevice in the shining weave. Someone in a powered pod? Kirk thought, having his doubts. The pod was hardly a meter wide. The little gleaming egg fired itself along at the Enterprise with such force and speed that, for a moment, Kirk feared for his outer hull. Yet barely a few meters from it, the egg snapped to a stop as sharply as if it had come to the end of a tether, and then inched delicately forward to touch the leading edge of the secondary hull. A moment later, it backed away again, leaving attached to the hull the bright, pearly line of something Kirk had heard, but never yet seen. One of the new tactile tractors that were also of Homolki make. Spinning its glowing line, the egg headed back toward the semi-spherical docking bay that was the far end of the brace. That was the far end of the base, and actually towed the Enterprise behind it, inch by inch at the start, then with more speed, a slow glide. Kirk found that looking at impossibility made his mouth dry. Scotty beside him was near spluttering with delighted perplexity. "That canna be done! I don't care what motive force you're using. Yet, there it is, Mr. Scott," Spock said. Once again, size proves deceptive. The operating principle is called elective mass. It is one of the assumptions that makes the inversion drive possible. He tilted his head to one side, watching the little glittering seed in utter calm. Certainly it looks unlikely. So do the equations involved, I assure you. Many of their elements trespass into what we have for some time considered impossibility. Yet, the drive works. "Makes your head hurt, does it?" Jim said, shooting an amused sidewise look at the Vulcan. Spock breathed out, shifting his shoulders a bit. "My somatic responses are hardly germane to the situation, Captain. It would be more accurate to say that there are facts I have yet to assimilate entirely." "There are?" Scotty said, grinning. Spock didn't deign to answer that one, merely gazed at the screen as they all did. The silver ovoid with its tractor pulled Enterprise deeper into the base. Abruptly, between the rounded far bay and the ship with its tug, light sprang into being. Lines of it. Lines making angles with one another, defining chords within the immense circle of the base's hull. 24 radial lines segmenting that circle, all meeting in the center, and woven among the radials, one by one, a dazzling confusion of oblongs and parallelograms of light. Straight at the glowing network, the little silver egg led the Enterprise, and finally, with eyes crossed, with only the tiniest jolt, right into it. Kirk let go the arms of the helm, which he had been gripping. As he did, the framework of light came loose from most of its anchor lines and dropped slowly about the Enterprise, wrapping itself closely about both hulls, clinging wherever it touched. The silver ovoid slipped through the mesh and darted away, leaving behind it a starship bound tight in lines of pearlescent white fire that dimmed somewhat in brilliance, but still pulsed, very much alive. "That," Kirk said, getting up from his chair, "has to be one of the weirdest dockings I've ever had. Let's go see the commander. Uhura, you have the con." Kirk and Spock and Scotty headed for the lift. As its door whooshed closed behind them and Uhura slid into the command chair, Sulu turned to Chekhov at the command console and gave him a wicked merry look. "Come into my parlor," said the spider to the fly. Chekhov rolled his eyes at the ceiling and idly began working out the initial parameters for a search and discover spiral in the next galaxy over. The Star Base's office complex was a little less exotic than its shimmering outworks. When the world came back after the transporter's glow was gone, Jim found himself standing in a very average transporter room. Not quite so average was the Sumulid chief engineer handling the console. He stood 3 meters high, a sheaf of constantly moving rose and violet tentacles with 8 restless stalked eyes peering about from the top of him. Lieutenant Commander's stripes manifested themselves in the skin of the barrels of several of his larger handling tentacles. Sulamids being color changers of great skill. "Sirs, madams, welcome be," the Sulamid said with a graceful flourish and wreathing of tentacles, knotting several of them in a gesture of respect. Down hall, left, 3 doors lift, 4 level down, 2 left ways, exit rightward, 6 doors right, waiting, Commander Cathasat, eagerly, introductions, briefing, legal intoxicants, sirs, madam's guide. Thank you, mister, Kirk said, having doubts about the mister, even as he said it. All 12 of the Sulamid sexes claimed to be male, especially the ones who had the children. I think we'll manage. They did, though Kirk was astonished again and again on the way down by how many of the non-hominid kinds of people were on station. Hamal was close to Sol and Terra, but it was also within the boundaries of the great Majora's Congeries, an integral... Majora's Congeries? But it was also within the boundaries of the great Majora's Congeries, an intragalactic open cluster of 20 stars that was home to as many wildly diverse species, from methane breathers to one-winged species that found the atmospheres of stars congenial. There was a branch of Starfleet Academy here to service this sector of space, and a library secondary only to that of Alexandria, too. The stable population was around 8,000 sentients, crewmen on assignment and their dependents, and civilians on vacation. For some of the base was a resort, privately financed and operated. The halls were noisy with translated and untranslated conversation, as various kinds of people chirped, squealed, laughed, grunted, or howled about their business. Kirk found himself smiling as he went, for there was an excitement in the air abnormal for even such a place as this, and his ship was at the heart of it. The commander's office door was open when they came to it. Kirk tapped twice on the doorsill and walked in, finding Cathasat getting up from behind its desk. It was a Hest of Rukba 5, a tall being, so slender as to look skeletal, with greenish-bronze skin stretched taut over a basically bipedal form. It was a Hest. Hestv? I assume the V is an extra. Hest had extra knees and elbows, and looked a touch peculiar to earthly eyes when they stood or sat. Their long, gaunt faces were adorned with large, gentle eyes, green or golden, that gave their faces a perpetually wistful look. Jim knew that look painfully well. Cathasat had used it on him often enough at poker, with great success. "Commander," he said, reaching out a hand and then putting it behind his back again on the Hest. No, that V is purposeful, and I have no idea how to say it. And putting it behind his back again in the Hest fashion. "Good to see you again." "Under these circumstances, I believe it," Cathasat said in its whispery voice, matching Kirk's gesture and then reaching out to clasp hands with him. "Perhaps you would make me known to your officers." "Commander Spock," Jim said, and Spock bowed, all reserved Vulcan courtesy. "Chief Engineer Scott," and Scotty copied Kirk's gesture, which Cathasat returned with the round-mouthed smile of its people. "No shortage of good company," it said. "Captain, I have some truly astonishing Nue I've been saving for some world-shattering occasion. Perhaps you gentlefolk would join me?" There were all kinds of racks, supports, and chairs in the office. It took a few moments to find ones that fit, but as soon as they had, the commander was passing around glasses and a crystal flask half full of the dark blue Nue. Kirk was glad to see it and poured himself a generous splash. Nue might taste like machinist's oil, but it also contained a neuropressor hormone that in most hominid Nue might taste like machinist's oil, but it also contained a neuropressor hormone that in most hominid chemistries enhanced whatever emotional state the drinker was presently experiencing, hence its slang name, more of the same. Jim took a long drink and got more cheerful than he'd been, and watched Scotty get more excited. Spock sipped his carefully and became more serenely unreadable by the moment. Getting things started in a hurry, are we? Kirk said. Is fleet pressuring you, Respected? No. The chief of the installation team, however, has asked to meet you as quickly as possible and get permission to start her work immediately. The commander hooted softly, a Hest laugh. She says she's waited 800 years to get out of the galaxy, and she won't wait. New tongue. And she won't wait a day longer than necessary now that the problem is handled. Kirk went over to the additions to crew roster in his head. That would be the Hamalki, then. Something scrabbled politely at the door. Are they here? High time, said a voice that didn't so much speak as chime, a sweet, liquid, brittle chattering, staccato, yet melodic. The person who went with the voice came scuttling into their midst in a swift flow of delicate, much-articulated legs, 12 of them, that were attached to a rounded central body. The being was an arachnoid, a big one, standing about a meter high on those legs, her body about a meter across and half a meter thick. That body was transparent in most places, translucent in others, made of an analog to chitin that was clear as glass. Most places the creature's surface was polished to mirror smoothness. The exception was the upper side of the abdomen, where clear nidal. Navigate all the normal words, right? And screw up the hard one. Of course. The exception was the upper side of the abdomen, where clear, needle-fine spines made of fur that glittered like grass on a dewy morning. The abdomen had a slender, nubbly ridge or crest running atop it from front to back, and in the ridge 12 eyes were set, 4 clustered at one end and 4 at the other, 4 studded along the ridge. At first glance they seemed expressionless, like a shark's, Jim thought, and repressed a shudder. Yet they also burned like blue-hot opals, full of shifting fires. And when one cluster of them fixed on Jim, he felt the personality behind them like a blow, and was impressed. This is a power, he thought as he rose to greet her, and then added to himself, irrationally relieved. My ship is in good hands. Captain Kirk, please sit, the wind chime voice said. Does a wind chime voice trill its R's, or does it, I don't even know. Does it just tinkle? And what does tinkling sound like? How many more pages in this chapter? I'm kind of done. I'm glad to have exorcised that demon. Done.